And now I'd like to welcome our expert panel for this week. In Israel, Professor Uzi Rabi, director of the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle East, and in Washington, D.C., Behnam bin Taleblu, a research fellow at the Federation to Protect Democracies. Thank you both for joining me today. Uzi, we'll start with you. What exactly Israel wants when it comes to Iran, and what are the chances to reach that goal of the current Israeli government?
What the Israeli government is really anxious about and afraid of is that what the American-U.S. talks that are going to be renewed next week in Vienna are going actually to be ended up in a fiasco where Iran is going to get an agreement, but this agreement would be grosso modo similar to that one we had in 2015. Now everybody knows that the Iranian nuclear program had made a real advance since then, and it goes without saying to say that this agreement can do nothing when it comes to Iran's nuclear problem. The second thing is that these talks are going to focus mainly on nuclear stuff. Nobody is going actually to deal with the Iranian adventures all over the Middle East. Nobody is going to deal with the ballistic, so to speak, file. So what we got here is kind of a feeling which is very, very uncomfortable. And I dare say it is not only typical for Israel, it is also applicable to some other Arab states. And since the United States has just come up with kind of a poor performance regarding Afghanistan, the odds are against something that would actually bring Iran to kind of a situation where it could be dealt with.
Yes, so Behnam in Washington, thanks as always for joining us. What does the American administration wants or wishes to reach?
So in essence, the Biden administration has been quite clear about its goals vis-a-vis Iran. As a previous guest said, it has a very narrow, almost nuclear-centric or nuclear-only view towards the threat posed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. It talks a lot about ballistic missiles and human rights issues and regional stability, but the bulk of its actions, the bulk of its interest remains focused on resurrecting or clawing back that 2015 nuclear deal known as the JCPOA. But as we know, in 2015, that deal was still insufficient to address Iran's nuclear program in the form it had in 2015. It is likely going to be, even if it is resurrected, which is increasingly unlikely given the Iranian demands ahead of November 29th, it is increasingly unlikely that whatever agreement, something a little bit less or something even a little bit more, would be grossly insufficient to address the Iranian nuclear program of 2021. And that leaves us with a larger policy problem, which is what is the Biden administration's Iran policy beyond its non-proliferation policy.
So Behnam, staying with you, it is no secret that when the then Trump administration left the JCPOA in 2018, they wished for either the regime in Iran to collapse or for the Iranians to obey or bow to Washington and rush to a new deal, which will be the dream deal of Jerusalem and Washington. Both didn't happen, and currently it seems like the Iranians have their upper hand.
Well, I would frame the Trump view a little bit differently. The goal was to first resurrect the penalties that Obama had waived, former President Obama had waived, and then build on them, and then use the leverage that increasing, escalating sanctions pressure had to get Iran to the table. Who knows what would have happened if there would have been a second term? Who knows what would have happened if there was going to be a deal with regional included or missile included? We'll never really know, but it's the same leverage that the Biden administration has been trying to denude, trying to weaken, to try to tempt Tehran to come back to the negotiating table. So there are, as you're correct to note, there are different approaches by Bush, by Obama, by Trump, and now, of course, by Biden towards Tehran. But Biden is resurrecting an older approach, an approach from the Obama administration, which says it shouldn't be regional and all these other matters included.
Yes.
It should be nuclear only, and it's worth paying for up front, which makes many people very nervous about the concept of premature sanctions relief or potentially even unenforced sanctions, which is what many worry about. about today.
So, Uzi, back to you. The carrots are obvious if there is a deal. The sanctions will be lifted, etc. Are there any sticks for Israel or Washington?
Iran, in the end of the day, feels as if it got the upper hand. And this is why we do see this intensification. Take into account that we have a new president, Ibrahim Raisi. This is kind of an extra extremist who also actually brings in a kind of some fan to some flaming the fan thing. And I would say that thing. Sticks are there. I hope so. I haven't heard about them. When it comes to the back of mind of Iran, it's just carrots. The Iranians are working under the assumption that whatever situation may come, the Iranians pretty sure that the Americans hasn't got sort of a plan B with what you say actually some other options. And this is the problem. And here comes the Israeli challenge. America is a great friend to Israel. Now you have actually to find out a middle way by which to deal with the Americans in a very generous and kind manner, but then beg America to leave you or to make you being left with kind of an option or a room for maneuver if and when.
So, Behnam, back to you. If the talks fails, what's the plan B that the Biden administration has, if at all?
Well, I'd like to pick up on a thread that the guest just mentioned, actually, which is an Iranian assumption. Iran is more confident in its plan B, than it believes the Biden administration is confident in its plan B, which is why it feels very comfortable with the very gross, very significant nuclear escalation that we saw starting in late 2020, early 2021. Things like 20% resumption at Fordo, things like enrichment to 60% purity. This is a threat the regime was making for a decade, but wasn't comfortable acting on until just this April 2021, the same months that talks restarted in Vienna between the then Rouhani administration and the P5+1 and the U.S. indirectly. So Iran is very comfortable with its escalation options because it does not believe there's going to be any kinetic or military pressure or pushback against an Iranian nuclear program. Amid here, the wild card is, as the guest mentioned, Israel. What will it do? What won't it do? What will it admit to overtly versus covertly, and how much the Biden administration really is going to prioritize regional security, regional peace. I think there are three clear tracks the Biden administration has. It's unclear if they're willing to activate them, but track one is diplomatic, which is, of course, to issue a resolution of censure at the Board of Governors of the IAEA, and then escalate the Iran nuclear crisis through the Joint Commission and Security Council and collapse the resolution 2231. Next is economic, to enforce the existing penalties that are already on the books, and then add to more sanctions, and then get Europe on board towards a multilateral maximum pressure policy. And the third, of course, is military, perhaps increased arms sales to Israel of precision strike capabilities, definitely more support to the Arab states of the Persian Gulf for interconnected air and missile defenses, and of course push back to the militias in the heartland of the Middle East, particularly those in Syria and in Iraq. And together, this can be an American plan B. But it's very clear right now that the Biden administration hasn't picked this yet.
Yes, clear. Behnam bin Taleblu in Washington, Uzi Rabi in Israel. Thanks so much, gentlemen, for joining me today. After